Thanks everyone so much for coming today. I really appreciate you keeping the people of Idaho informed on their government. You are the bedrock of democracy in Idaho, and people could not make an informed vote without the work that you do. I also want to welcome Senator Wintrow as our new Senate Minority Leader. She is one of the smartest, most compassionate, and hardworking people I've ever known, and the people of Idaho and her caucus are very fortunate to have her serving in her role. And Senator Wintrow is going to be taking the lead on responding to the specifics of the budget that we heard today. I'm going to start out actually by taking on the Democrats' proactive objectives that we have this session. Although I think we are largely supportive of the governor's proposed budget, as you'll hear more, and I think we're going to play a pretty instrumental role in ensuring that these investments in education and infrastructure and public safety and public lands actually come to fruition. These are all items that we've been advocating for many, many years, and we're not going to stop now. We're going to keep pushing to get as many of these past the finish line as possible. First, property taxes. Our constituents have been reaching out to us for years and demanding property tax relief, and we have listened. For years, we have brought bills to reduce property taxes in responsible ways, and that's a key differential here in that it's very important to us that people be able to remain in their homes, that their property taxes remain affordable, but that we do it in a manner that leaves vital services intact, that leaves services like fire and police adequately funded. It's not acceptable to us to see property tax solutions that simply come in and hatchet local government budgets. We think that will hurt people more than it will help. We've had a number of solutions over the years that unfortunately have not been permitted hearings or votes in the past, but we're very optimistic that we're going to see a breakthrough this year on some of these items to meaningfully and responsibly reduce property taxes. Things like restoring the indexed homeowners exemption. I'm very optimistic that we're actually going to get that through this time. In the past, we had broad bipartisan support, but it couldn't get a hearing. This year, I think we're going to get a hearing, and I think if it gets a hearing, it's going to go all the way. We have been pushing for impact fees for new construction to pay for the building of new schools so that growth pays for growth and it's not a burden on property taxpayers. This is, again, something that we're very optimistic about moving forward with this year. Other things that we've been working on are certainly increasing and adjusting the circuit breaker in a meaningful way. There was a little bit of progress made on that, but it backfired, and we need to fix that. So that's a biggie. That's going to be top of our priority list, is addressing property taxes, and we think we're going to get there. Another point actually is if we're actually able to support these items in the governor's budget in terms of enhancing funding of education and some of these other items in infrastructure, we actually think it will have the side effect of pretty substantially reducing property taxes. A huge driver of property taxes right now is trying to fill the gap from the state inadequately funding teacher salaries and operational funding at schools. If we're able to get this $330 million into the K-12 system, I think that will yield huge dividends to property taxes as well as to the students of this state. It will mean fewer levies, and in many parts of the state, it's those bonds and levies that are really a third of your property tax bill. So if we can take that off the shoulders of property taxpayers, it will be a big win-win all around. Other objectives of our caucus this session include ensuring that there's permanent coverage of post-traumatic stress injuries for first responders. As you may recall, we got that covered on a temporary basis, and that's sunsetting this year. So we need to make sure we take that sunset off so that those police and firefighters and first responders who experience horrors in their line of work can count on long-term coverage for their post-traumatic stress injuries. We support law enforcement, we support first responders. We appreciate that there's an increase in pay for them in this budget, but we think it's also important to care for them when they experience injuries in the line of work. We also think school facilities funding mechanisms are absolutely critical. The governor's budget was largely silent on that, but as Senator Wintrow will address more, we have more than $1 billion backlog, huge driver of property taxes, and we want to come up with a really meaningful mechanism to actually fix the roofs and the chemistry labs and the plumbing in our schools and the buildings, not just teacher pay, but the actual buildings. We want to ensure that new mothers can remain on Medicaid for a year after they give birth. Right now, they're kicked off after 60 days. Most states allow substantially more generous coverage. We've made life rather difficult for women of childbearing age in recent years, this legislature has, and I think it's time we maybe at least do a small something to let up on the never-ending punishment that's been doled their way. We want to improve reimbursement rates for Medicaid caregivers so that seniors and those with serious medical needs can remain in their home. We want to improve support for victims of domestic violence, clean slate legislation to allow those with minor nonviolent offenses to re-enter the workforce and have access to jobs and housing, which will also reduce recidivism, we believe. And we want to also continue addressing access to affordable housing. We were a little surprised to see that there was no intent to put more money in the Affordable Workforce Housing Fund that we saw last year, but we continue to have an affordable housing crisis in this state, and we Democrats place that as a very high priority and something that we want to address. Unfortunately, while we have a long list of good things that we'd like to get done, we do know that much of our time and energy this session will have to be spent on defense. History has taught us this, that we will be defending against attempts to create voucher programs, to take money that is desperately needed by our public schools and steer it instead into unaccountable private and religious schools. We know that many of the governor's proposed budget items, which again, we support, but that's not a given that it's going to get through this legislature. And we know that we're going to have to work hard to keep as many of those items alive as possible, and many of them are really critical. We know that there will be the inevitable onslaught of extremist and divisive social issue bills, that they will come back with more efforts to jail librarians and ban pride parades and persecute transgender kids and their families and ban drag shows and restrict voting access and further restrict healthcare and reproductive healthcare access and more. Unfortunately, today's Idaho GOP uses the word freedom a lot in their advertisements, but unfortunately in practice in recent years, they have become the party that wants to tell you what books you're allowed to read, what books your kids are allowed to read, what health care you're allowed to get, and now perhaps even what clothing you're allowed to wear. And their platform, as we learned this morning, has become increasingly radical, including such items as ending Idaho's extremely successful healthcare exchange, blocking all same-sex marriage regardless of what federal law may say, ending young people's ability to remain on their parents' health insurance, and even ending the scant rape and incest exceptions that we have in our already draconian abortion bans. And now they are strictly requiring adherence to that platform and threatening punishment of members who stray from it. So we might see even more extreme legislation and restrictions of rights than we've seen in previous years, which is saying something. But our Democratic caucus, of course, has a long history of working effectively across the aisle. We are always ready to do so anytime and anywhere it is possible. But we will stand steadfastly to protect personal freedoms and to fight for the rights of every Idahoan. So the people of Idaho can always count on us for all of those things. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, the new Senate Minority Leader, Senator Melissa Wintrow.
You're so kind in your introduction. I see there's
Let's get you pinned up. You have a lot of pins, or cookies. You got 3 here.
Oh, lost one. Is it okay on the scarf? Is that okay? And this one? Okay. Sorry, y'all. That's the hardest part of the interview, is getting clipped up. Is that okay? Oh my goodness, y'all. Well, thank you, Representative Rubel, and thank you so much for those kind remarks. I can tell you it is such a huge honor to serve our state in this way and to serve my caucus, and I just thanks for their faith and trust in me, and I'll do everything I can to be a good leader in this body. I'm going to take over a little bit more from what Representative Rubel was speaking about. I'm going to try to stick to my notes a little bit because the folks who know me know if I get a little distracted, we might end up somewhere else. But, you know, as Representative Rubel said at the highest level, we very much support the governor's budget. It reflects priorities that Democrats have been advocating for years, for decades, and we're delighted to see that we can agree with the governor on this. That families and businesses of Idaho need a far more robust investment in education, roads, bridges, mental health, parks, water, public safety, and this proposed budget is such a great start. We're watching closely, and we've been advocating behind the scenes to be sure that the budget that we passed in House Bill 1 in the special session, that it works as we need to in investments in Idaho education. And that work done by hundreds and hundreds of volunteers from Reclaim Idaho really helped get that Quality Education Act. And as the governor said, Idahoans expect us to support public education, and so we're all ready to roll up our sleeves to do that. And we're delighted that the budget doesn't play shell games. It doesn't simply swap money out of other school funding and doesn't try to redirect public dollars in private or religious schools. They pay increases proposed for teachers, and school personnel offer us a chance to recruit and retain educators. We know that we've been struggling to do that. And finally, that Idaho, we can get Idaho out of last place in American education funding. We strongly support the proposed investments in infrastructure, broadband, mental health, water quality, and outdoor recreation. We, as Democrats, have championed public lands and outdoor recreation, as our beautiful outdoors are the bedrock of our quality of life here in Idaho. And it's a huge draw to bring skilled workforce into Idaho. Last year, we supported record investments in our parks and clean water, and we proudly will do so again. And if the history is any guide, the governor will need every vote from every Democrat to get these budgets across the finish line, as Representative Rubel intimated. There are some additional items that I think are critical to address, notably the school facilities. As Representative Rubel indicated, the Office of Performance Evaluation actually documented nearly $1 billion in required maintenance of existing school facilities, and that is before considering the need for new schools that we know is being really a struggle in our communities today. As the fastest growing state in America, we're going to have serious overcrowding problems, which we already have, and we're going to need to build new schools, and which will drive the school facilities need well over $1 billion. The governor has earmarked $120 million for undetermined property tax relief, which in our view should be allocated to school buildings, which would accomplish two things. It could fix our school buildings and lower property taxes, as school bonds are a substantial component of property tax bills. But the $120 million, if we can get it, is at best a resolution of 10% of a more than $1 billion problem. School building costs are a huge driver of property taxes, we know that, and they're crushing our citizens. We wish that we were in a position to tackle this problem in earnest. Unfortunately, our revenue is projected to drop more than $700 million in the next year due to years of top margin income tax rebates and revenue reductions that overwhelmingly benefited the wealthiest individuals among us and the corporate in our state. And now, even if we're successful in convincing our colleagues to allocate funds toward these school facilities, property taxes will be left to bear 90% of the cost of fixing those crumbling schools. We share the governor's emphasis on funding schools, increasing pay for law enforcement, fixing our roads and bridges, supporting mental health, and investing in public lands and clean water. However, we know that it is far from a given that this budget will survive our Republican supermajority in the legislature. We know that there will be many attempts to divert funds away from public schools into dangerous voucher and ESA schemes, and to withhold funds proposed for infrastructure and other needs in order to further spike up income tax cuts that will bestow money overwhelmingly on the wealthiest. Democrats will work hard to protect the investments proposed in the governor's budget and ensure they become a reality. Frankly, without the work of many Democrats in this legislature, it's doubtful that we'll accomplish all these investments. So as I sat and listened and applauded the governor, I thought with a little hesitancy, we have a lot of work to do to make sure we're all on the same page. We're rolling up our sleeves, as he said. We're thinking big picture. We're solving big problems, and we're staying away from the fray that sometimes distract us from what real Idahoans want and need as they talk around their kitchen table. So with that, I would like to say a few things about Medicaid. As Representative Rubel intimated, I heard Representative Moyle speaking about that. Medicaid has been a wonderful investment in our state, and it has kept thousands of people healthy and on health insurance. And thank God we had Medicaid expansion when we did, especially during this pandemic. And we will not want to strip anyone of their health care, especially in this economy. And so I hope to see that we renew that Medicaid. It has been a huge investment in our state. It has benefited all our population. And we need, as we know, health care, which is the foundation of any healthy community. Thank you. Do you want me to share microphones now?
Oh, I'll just stand close to you. So, any questions?
I'll have to lean over close.
Yeah.
Representative, you mentioned that this might be the year for indexing the homeowner's exemption. What changed this year?
Well, we'd worked previously with Representative Skog, and I think most of our caucus were actually co-sponsors with him, and good 40+ Republicans also. It was a very well-supported bipartisan bill that was unable to get a hearing or a vote under the previous chair. But I think you'd have to ask him, but I think he's very optimistic that he's got the go-ahead to get a hearing on that, and that we are certainly very enthusiastic supporters to help work that through. Yeah, Kelsey.
On the subject of reproductive rights.
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Do you expect any legislation around supporting mothers who are being forced to go through with their pregnancies, like the governor's talked about in the past? Or do you expect any legislation to come around that?
Well, I think there will be legislation, as I indicated, that a number of us have worked on that I think has bipartisan support, to extend the period for women to remain on Medicaid from 60 days up to a year. Beyond that, I mean, it's going to be very interesting on that front. You know, there could be backsliding. I know, as I know, I said the Republican Party platform is actually to strip out whatever allowances there are in right now for rape and incest. So things could get more extreme, or we could see some effort to accommodate Judge Windmill's ruling to at least allow for treating women who are facing medical emergencies. It will be interesting to see fork in the road. Things could get worse. They could get infinitesimally improved. But I don't know that there's going to be anything much more robust. The things that we know would actually reduce the abortion rate and would actually help women, I think, are things that are not on the table. When you look around the world at the places with the lowest abortion rates, they're places that have, universal childcare, universal pre-K, very, robust access to free contraception, robust access to accurate sex education. Those are all things that the supermajority here has very actively opposed in the past. So I don't know that we're going to see progress on a lot of the policy proposals that would really meaningfully help women.
Can I do a follow-up?
Sure.
This is kind of more niche, but I've written about the Maternal Mortality Review Committee that needs to be renewed in July. Is that something that's on your radar as a priority to get done?
Yes. Yes, it is, to renew that. Absolutely. That's something that needs to happen. We have a terrible maternal mortality rate. And I think, that's a very worthy investment, and I would be really shocked if that weren't renewed.
Yeah, and I think in the most recent study they released, that I think it was noted that I think almost every mortality, every death actually could have been prevented with healthcare or early detection or prenatal care.
Yeah.
With the progress in the progression of education this year, do you think there will be an advocacy for sex education as well?
I mean, we have some in there. Historically, the battle has really been on whether we're going to be able to keep the level of sex education that we have. There's been a lot of misinformation, staggering amounts of misinformation about this, right? I mean, if a teacher does even the most moderate education about the biological reality of, what is an ovary, there are interest groups out there who want to gin up hysteria that there's porn literacy being taught in schools or whatever, which is nonsense. But, it sells books, as they say, or at least it gets donations made to these organizations and gets people all revved up and helps feed the war against public education. So frankly, we'll be lucky if we can keep the level of biologically accurate sex education that we have, given the wild scope of misdirection and misrepresentation that has surrounded these discussions in schools.
I would just make one little note. I actually got a call from someone, I won't mention the school district, that they were doing some educational presentations trying to do anti-violence work, right? Preventing sexual assault and those kind of things. And there was concern that they couldn't use the word consent or gender or just simple language. And I think that's really the troubling thing, is when we start to censor language and content at that level, we're harming all of us. We can't get to the heart of how to prevent an actual assault. So I think that's really dangerous. We don't want to get to that level.
Yeah. And that was what I think was underpinning a lot of this idea that they were teaching pornography to kindergartners. When you dug into it, it was things like they were telling kids not to let strangers touch you in certain places. Yes. Things that are pretty actually foundational to children's safety. But again, the misinformation machine takes off, and all of a sudden they turn that into they're teaching pornography to children. So it's always a struggle, even just to get that level of information required for children's safety, out there in schools.
It's important.
I believe it was Senator Wintrow talking about how much time is going to be spent on defense rather than offense this year, especially with losing a seat in the House. The math is even more pretty minimal for your caucus numbers.
We have a lot of reasonable-minded folks across the aisle that we work with, and they get it. I mean, it's not just us against the world. I think we're very good at building bipartisan coalitions. But part of the coalition-building process that we need to engage in, frankly, is with the public. We need public engagement, and we need the public showing up and making their voice heard, and it can't just be the loudest, most extreme minority that shows up to hearings. We need all those people who want this to be a reasonable place to live, who don't want this to be a state where any LGBTQ person or their family is terrorized. I mean, we need them to show up and let them know that they're out there and they care and they vote and they're watching. So part of our strategy is always to make sure that the word is out, that the people know when these things are happening, and let them know when is the hearing, who are the people to write to, and how can they stand up for their families and their children to make sure that they're not terrorized out of the state, which, by the way, is not an idle threat. I mean, I knock doors hours and hours and hours every week, every single day, and it was getting to the point where 3 or 4 times a week I was encountering people who would tell me, oh, don't bother registering me to vote, or don't bother sending me an absentee. I'm moving, I have a gay child and we can't live here anymore. Or, oh, there was a nice gay couple who lived next door but they moved to Oregon. Or I plan to be moving because I have a transgender kid. I mean, it is, the state is becoming profoundly hostile to families who have any member in their family who does not fit this cookie cutter mold of the perfect straight white Christian model, and we can't have that. We need Idaho to be welcoming, and we need to stop frankly what's become largely a campaign of terror against these minority groups, and make sure that this is an embracing place. It's what our businesses need, it's what our families need, and we need the public to help us with that, and we need folks across the aisle to work with us on it too. I don't at all think that all Republicans are on board with this by any stretch. I think many of them share our views that we need to be an embracing place that welcomes and loves everybody.
Do you think there's going to be broad support for putting the entire $120 million towards school facilities?
Well, my quick answer is no. There might be, hopefully we'll get enough support. This is not going to be something that passes with a 95% vote, but maybe we'll be lucky enough to get it through with a 51% vote. I mean, we know that there are large advocacy groups in the state who don't think there should be public schools in our state, who, and they're playing this little Jedi mind trick of, well, if we call it government schools, then we can get people to turn against them, because they know everyone likes public schools, but if you use the term government schools, then maybe we can shut them down. And so when we have a large portion of people who just don't think there should be public schools, period, it will be a hard sell to get more money put into buildings for public schools. But I think there are also a lot of folks across the aisle who do value public schools and who know that their constituents do as well. So I think there will be a substantial number of those on the Republican side of the aisle who would like to see support for our public schools, including the facilities and the benefits to property tax reduction that come with it. So I'm optimistic that that's something that can happen. Again, I don't think it'll be a landslide vote, but I think it can be done. Do you have anything on that point?
I think you said it.
Okay. Oh, I see a hand over there. Yeah.
Yeah, getting back to Medicaid, we've heard repeatedly from Republican leaders leading up to the session the desire to rein in Medicaid, that it's gone far over budget, what was promised. It sounds like an outright repeal of Medicaid expansion perhaps is not possible or not on the table, but of course they're going to try something. When it comes to Medicaid for the Democratic caucus, is there a bright line of parts of Medicaid that Republicans should not touch that are absolutely not on the negotiating table?
Why don't you let me start, and then I'll let you do back cleanup on that.
You betcha.
How's that? I think first and foremost, we as Democrats would stand opposed to any kind of repeal of health care. I think what some of my colleagues across the aisle are forgetting is the huge investment that we've made and that we receive, and how that helps grow our economy. Not only helps the individual's health, but we have a larger pool of folks. We do better and lowers everybody's rates. It helps private insurance. It helps everyone. So I think what we're forgetting about is the bigger picture of how much we've benefited from having Medicaid expansion. We are actually providing insurance for the first time for folks, hardworking families, right? Who doesn't want to do that? Because and I heard today the governor use the word, it's the moral thing to do with education. It's the moral and fiscal responsible thing to do with healthcare as well. And so it is a very important piece of legislation that our voters actually voted for, and we need to respect that.
And I would add to that, I understand there's a lot of chatter around the cost overruns. I think it's very premature to even know what the cost is, because things got very skewed. We had a pandemic. There was the federal the emergency health order that banned the state from removing people from Medicaid. So we've had much higher enrollment rates than we would have in a normal scenario. I believe that federal emergency order is likely to scale down in April, at which point we're going to see dramatically reduced numbers of people on Medicaid just naturally. So I think it's really premature right now to overreact and shut down a program that has had tremendous benefits, that's saved our rural hospitals, that has saved many lives, based on a cost number that is very artificially inflated right now and in all likelihood doesn't reflect reality at all. I think we should look at this number again in a year or two once we've seen things stabilize and once we've seen the numbers, the enrollment numbers go back to what we would expect them to look like in a non-pandemic, not emergency scenario that involves a lot of mandates that wouldn't normally be in effect.
And I just final note on that is I kept hearing people say it's going to bankrupt the state, it's going to bankrupt the state. We have a surplus, right? Again. So it didn't bankrupt the state.
Yeah. Another thing, just to add briefly to that, is we're going to be in real trouble if we do get rid of Medicaid because we've dismantled the entire apparatus that we had in place to address uninsured people. We've basically shut down the CAT fund.
Yeah.
The idea was, we used to have the CAT fund in place to help compensate hospitals when they had to cover uninsured people. If we all of a sudden dump a whole bunch of uninsured people back on the hospitals and just tell them to eat the cost, that's kind of a dirty trick when we've taken away the CAT fund that was supposed to compensate them for that. So we're going to have to rebuild a lot of apparatus that was dismantled if we do go down this path of ending Medicaid expansion. So I think there's a lot of consequences that maybe haven't been thought out in terms of fallout if we were to really get rid of it at this point.
And the last thing I'm going to say about Medicaid, you can see it's really important, is that I remember being in the Joint Finance and Appropriation Committee when people were attacking Medicaid before, what we were doing is we actually, on those, when we expanded Medicaid, that decreased appropriations in other budgets. So we saved money in other places, and we kind of forget that.
Yeah. Any other questions? Anyone? All right.
You've had a long day.
Well, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you being here, and reach out to us anytime.